Down here in Mexico, fighting games have always been a staple of our arcade culture. After all, we Mexicans always love to compete in almost anything, from who can score most goals in a soccer game to who can down the spiciest habanero pepper without either dying or cowering out. And of course, this genre provides just that. But unlike many other countries, Capcom's seminal fighting game series, Street Fighter, didn't catch on as much. Instead of CPS2 boards, you would most likely find another piece of hardware from SNK, the good old MVS. Why is that the case? Well, a couple of reasons. Biggest one being, of course, piracy. MVS boards could easily be busted open and converted into bootleg versions without much of a hassle, and also the fact that MVS boards in general were cheaper as well for the owner. Thanks to this, SNK games could be seen all across the country, from the big fancy arcades to the tortilla shops down in the dingiest, most shady corner of the neighborhood. And if you wanted to settle things with someone, you'd gone down to your nearest arcade and fired up the most recent edition of the King of Fighters, or KOF 2K2 if you played at any point past 2003, and threw down until someone was either out of patience or money, at which point you just started punching each other. But that's besides the point. This was not my situation at all. I really never had any arcades near my home during the 90s, and my circle of friends was non-existent, so I had to make do with the closest thing I had, which was of course my PlayStation 1 and the multitude of games I had at my disposal to play. And of course, today's subject was one of those many games I had back in the day. And although the foundation of my love for this particular genre had been created earlier with a little game called Tekken 2, the one that really cemented it was this particular title, which I played so much that the disc I had ended up scratched beyond repair and I had to move to something else. But the reason why I'm revisiting it today is because recently I've kinda been on a binge watch of YouTube videos about the many KOF desperation moves throughout the series, and this sparked a bit of nostalgia in me to play one of these games again. But more specifically, the one that I enjoyed so much when I was a kid. And so here we are. Is this game still as good as I remember it, or have my memories of days gone by clouded my opinion on this game? Well, let's find out. Without further ado, these are my thoughts on The King of Fighters 99. Our story begins after the end of the King of Fighters 97. With the tournament done and Orochi finally sealed, it seemed like everything was going to return to normal for our protagonist Kyo Kusanagi. But sometime after the battle with Orochi, it seemed like Kyo just vanished from the face of the earth and no one could explain why. We cut to 2 years later, and once again invitations have been sent for another KOF tournament, although this time around it seems to be a more secreted affair compared to how it was before, in part because of the many disastrous events that had been surrounding the tournament recently. Also, since Kyo isn't really around anymore, obviously someone must take his place as the hero of the story, right? Well, this is where one of our new characters for this game, K-Dash, fits into things. Our little white-haired boy here is actually an experiment of the Nest's organization, more specifically DNA experimentation with cells from Kyo Kusanagi, who the organization captured after the end of the 97 tournament. Anyways, he, alongside his partner Maxima, has been tasked to enter the newest edition of the tournament, partnered with Benimaru from the Japan team and Shingo, Kyo's #1 fanboy and self-proclaimed student, who received an invitation for the tournament as well. And speaking of that, invitations had been sent to this new edition of the King of Fighters, but there are some weird things about this one. First and foremost, as I've mentioned before, unlike past editions, this seems to be a more quiet and under-the-radar affair, with almost no involvement from the media or anyone outside of the participants. Also, there has been a slight change of rules regarding the fights. While a 3v3 combat structure still applies, the invitation letters mention striker battles, which is something that confuses a lot of the participants because this is a very new concept. But other than that, everything seems fine. So the table is set and we are left with a couple of questions. Where did Kyo disappear to after the events of 97 and his capture by the Nest organization? Who is this Nest organization and what exactly do they want? And most importantly, what in the hell are striker battles? You're probably asking yourself, where exactly did I get all this information from? Well, like many other fighting games, I had to look it up through outside sources like wikis and stuff. Because let's face it, very few people even care about stories in fighting games at all. And I don't blame them. Most fighting game stories are either paper-thin excuses for the characters to punch each other, or super complicated messes where nothing is comprehensible at all and has a million plotlines that amount to nothing at the end of the day. And the thing is, as much as I am a fan of certain KOF characters and their stories, I can also recognize that it doesn't really matter and you only get to experience it through supplementary materials that you have to get out of your way to read, which for a more casual fan is poison. My point is, if you care enough about the story to know that there is one in this game, then good for you. But not knowing will definitely not take anything from your actual experience with this game. And there isn't enough there to enjoy anyways. Just look the other way on this one. In terms of presentation, I must say I like SNK's sprite work, as it always has managed to look realistic yet having an anime edge to it at the same time. And this time around, I must say it's pretty on point, especially with this being the last game that uses this art style, for lack of a better term. But what do I mean by this? Well, if you notice, while SNK's sprite work looks pretty consistent all across the series, if you pay attention you can see the difference in details of the sprites depending on which saga the game takes place in, if that makes sense. Let me put it this way. When you look at KOF 94 through 96, you can see that the sprites look kinda old. Not like really old, but definitely reflect how most SNK sprites were at the time. The animations were stiff and the proportions of the characters look odd compared to how they would be depicted in later games. Then we have the 97 through 99 look, where the sprites look a bit more detailed and the characters resemble more their iconic looks. The animations also look somewhat stiff, but they definitely look better than the earlier set of sprites. But sadly, if you compare it to some of the other contemporaries of this time, like Garou Mark of the Wolves or Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, they pale in comparison. Don't get me wrong, this game still looks good, but there are some things that do look like holdovers from older games, and at this point SNK really needed to step up their game in some aspects, like the backgrounds for example. Sure, they look detailed and work well with the more gritty tone of this game, but there is a difference between gritty and just plain boring. Like that stage that looked like it's set outside of some dude's front yard. Like, what the hell were they thinking? Thankfully, at least the character designs are still strong. The characters that return from previous entries, which mind you is a big portion of the roster, look great, and the new characters like K-Dash or Maxima are on point. Although from a simple glance you can tell that they are very, very 90s. Also, the redesign for Kyo is just amazing. This version of Kyo's design is my personal favorite. The decision to ditch the school uniform in favor of a more grungy design was, I feel, the correct one, considering the fact that by this point he isn't really a student anymore and had a major shift in both personality and moveset. The character portraits that appear at the end of fights and at the character select screen are pretty right as well. They certainly make the characters look appealing and cool at the same time, which is always a good thing in my book. Finally, we have the UI design, which I'm not a big fan of, honestly. Sure, KOF UIs were never anything to write home about to begin with, but this one just looks dull. And also they decided to make the baffling decision to move the super meters right below the life bar, which makes it a little bit harder to know exactly how much meter do you have at any given time. In general, the presentation of this game is average at best. It definitely has some cool things to it, but some of the negatives really bothered me a lot. Although most of it comes down to the game coming up at a time where some of the greatest games in the genre came out, so do take my opinion with a grain of salt. And speaking of average, it's about time I talk about the audio aspect in this game, which, full disclosure, is completely based on the version of the game I'm taking a look at here, which is the PlayStation 1 version. And oh boy, is this gonna be a juicy one for sure. First and foremost, since this version of the game runs on a CD format, it comes with the benefits of having CD quality music, which in this case replaces the original soundtrack with a rearranged version of the songs that you know and love from the arcade version. While I do enjoy the arranged version of the soundtrack quite a bit, there are some tracks I wish I could listen to in their original instrumentation, like Kyo or Iori's themes. Sadly, unlike some other CD games that offer this same feature, you are stuck with the arranged version of the tracks only, which is strange because games that came out earlier for the system had given you the choice of using either the arranged or original tracks. But what about the compositions themselves? Well, I'm glad to say that they are quite amazing, even in their arranged forms. The themes for each of the teams sound so different and unique from each other, and they definitely sound like something that the team members would listen to. Unfortunately, this is as far as the good portion of the audio design goes, because in exchange for having some good quality audio for the sounds in this game, any other sound effect sounds like shit. Seriously, it sounds like I downloaded a song on Napster back in the 90s. The voices of the characters, the hit sounds, hell, even the system menus all sound so low quality. And don't tell me that's because limitations of the system, because games before and after this one had a similar good sounding quality on both ends of the audio design. So this is totally on the guys who made the port. But hey, aside from the low ass quality, the sounds are pretty good themselves. Maybe not on par with Sega or Namco's, but SNK fighting games always sounded recognizable even from across arcades, and KOF 99 is no exception. Everything is pretty smooth. In general, the audio department is, as I've mentioned at the top of this section, average at best. The arranged music is nice and the iconic SNK sounds are there, but the quality disparity in this version is what really bums me out. I would prefer the arcade version of the sound any day of the week over this one. Alright, as of right now I've been feeling a bit down with how every other aspect has been going so far, but hopefully the proverbial plate of meat and potatoes is going to compensate for the side meals being, well, average. Welcome to the gameplay section. In terms of different playing modes, KOF offers what you could find in most console ports of SNK, or more specifically, King of Fighters games. You get your traditional team mode, team versus, team all, which is basically a survival mode, a practice mode, and the same modes for 1v1 fights. The variety is nice, but to be honest, I prefer team modes just because that's KOF's bread and butter. As mentioned on the story section, the main type of matches you're going to have in this game are confrontations of 4v4, with 3 characters being the main ones you use for the match, and the last one serving as your striker. Now, I should take a little bit of time to explain exactly what a striker is, since I also mentioned that mechanic during the story section. Strikers are basically reserved members that you can call up during a round with the B and C buttons, depending on how you configure your controller. You get 3 stocks at the beginning of the match, and when you use one, the character you chose as a striker will come out and perform a special attack or action. Every single character has their own unique striker action, and some of them don't even affect your opponent directly. You earn stocks with each character you lose, which can help you out to gain an advantage on your opponent by either creating combo opportunities, restoring your own HP, or even draining your opponent's meter. But do make sure to use them adequately, because once you use them, they are not coming back. And since we're talking about some of the meters that you can see on screen while playing, I might as well talk about the super meter and some of the functions it serves to the overall gameplay. You gain super meter by doing a variety of multiple actions, like using special moves, attacking, and receiving damage. You can store up to 3 stocks of the super meter and use them in a variety of ways that can help you turn the tide of battle or escape some tight situations. But with like your striker, you have to be careful in the way you spend it. The first and most obvious way you can use meter in this game is by using desperation moves, special moves that can take a chunk out of your opponent's life if you manage to land them. And you have 2 versions, a regular one and a super one that only triggers when your life bar starts flashing red. Needless to say, the super variants obviously deal more damage, but the downside is that you don't have invincibility frames during the startup, so if you get hit, you could possibly be opened for a combo from the opponent. This also applies to regular desperation moves as well. You can also use the stocks for special commands known as Guard Cancel and Guard Counter. Guard Cancel can be initiating by pressing the A and B buttons and can let you reposition yourself after you block an attack, which can also lead you to turning the tables on your opponent. Guard Counter, on the other hand, lets you land an attack that knocks the opponent down, giving you a bit of space to either fall back, rethink what you're doing, or start pressuring the other player like there's no tomorrow. Both actions cost a stock of meters, so as with desperation moves, you have to be careful when you're using them. Now, if you spend your full meter, you can enter one of these two special states, Counter and Armor mode, which are activated by pressing the A, B and C buttons for the Counter mode and B, C and D for the Armor mode, which gives you a couple of nice perks and benefits. For its duration, Counter mode allows you to use unlimited desperation moves, guard cancels, guard counters, and gives your command and special attacks more power. Although sadly, your super desperation moves are disabled even if you have low enough health. Armor mode, on the other hand, is what it says on the tin. It gives you reduced damage and you don't get stunned as easily by attacks, although it disables all other abilities that use meter. I feel it is best used if you just need to get in and start wailing on your opponent. Almost every way you can use your meter is useful if you know how and when to use it, although I fail to see the benefits of using Armor mode over Counter mode. You have way more tools at your disposal on top of getting extra damage, which sounds way better than just armor and hits, but that's just me. There are 4 buttons, A, B, C and D, which serve as your main attack actions, which are Weak Punch, Weak Kick, Strong Punch and Heavy Punch. Obviously, they take more or less time to perform depending on the intensity of the attack and deal damage accordingly. You can also crouch and jump, which obviously will change the properties of your attacks depending on the situation and can give you more advantageous positions, like how using a strong kick while crouching will sweep the opponent. You also get command normals, which basically are a combination of a single button and a direction, giving you a different attack than if you pressed it just as is. Lastly, you have special moves unique to each character, which are performed by inputting a combination of directional movements and one of 2 buttons depending on the intensity of the attack. This same principle applies to using desperation moves, except for the last part. I gotta say, while going back to this game I remembered something. The inputs for some of the desperation moves and even some specials are super stiff. Like, the timing is definitely strict for the stick input, and most of the time I found myself doing stuff I didn't want to, even if I used an analog stick. Although that may be my poor reflexes. But for some reason I find it easier to pull off some of the moves after I chain them with a couple of regular attacks, which by the way do feel a bit stiff as well, but I could get the timing down easier than performing raw specials. I don't think this system is bad at all. It may feel a little bit awkward, but I'm sure that if I spent more time in it I could possibly get better at how to deal with stuff. And it has some neat ideas like the striker system. But I can see why I didn't just go back to this game that much. And with good reason. Those 2 are either peaks or good returns to form, while 99 is trapped in that transitional period between old and new improvements to the battle systems. In that context, this game is not worth more than an hour. And that's maybe. Coming back to this game made me realize something. Even if most of the stuff I played back in the day has maintained its quality and charm, there will always be stuff that is in a school or hasn't aged well. And as much as I hate to say it, The King of Fighters 99 falls into this category. I don't feel it's a bad game, nor does it make me angry, except for the final boss, which even in the lowest difficulty input reads like a motherfucker, a trope of SNK games I'm not very fond of. I look at it this way. The same year this released in arcades, there was already way better stuff out. And when you are competing with masterpieces, being average is the worst you can do in this type of situations. I appreciate the trip down memory lane, but this sport in particular also suffers from the disc-based 2D fighting game syndrome, making for some lengthy and quite honestly infuriating waiting times. You could mitigate this by playing one-on-one fights instead, but what's the point? If you're going to play something from this era, there are way better options out there. If you're going to play a King of Fighters game, there's really no strong reason to go back to this specific entry at all, not even for nostalgic reasons. I'll just look at this game from a distance and probably never play it again. So, with this game out of the way and back in the shelf, probably forever, it's time I move into greener pastures, although I'm in a little bit of a crossroads right now. By the time this video comes out, Yakuza Kiwami 2 will be close to release, and of course I'm diving in as soon as I get it. But at the same time the console version of Fire Pro Wrestling World comes out and I wanna give it a little highlight. And of course there's tons of older stuff as well, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm paring it down to two possible options, either Fire Pro Wrestling World or Yakuza Kiwami 2. But that is a video for another day. For now, keep doing the stuff you do and be nice. I am Hazard Kujaker, and I'll catch you later.